Waiter allows hungry children and their mom in diner. Unaware undercover, boss will change his life. We don't serve people who can't pay. The assistant manager said coldly, blocking the entrance as a mother with two hungry children stood in the doorway. But one waiter was about to risk everything to do what was right. What he didn't know was that the man in booth 7 was watching every move, and he had the power to change everyone's life forever. If you believe that kindness should never be a business decision, please like and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Now let's see how one act of compassion transformed an entire restaurant chain. Ethan Miller adjusted his black tie for the third time that morning, checking his reflection in the cracked mirror of Sonny's Diner's employee restroom. At 28, he possessed a business degree that hung framed in his studio apartment, a reminder of dreams deferred by harsh economic realities. The morning shift at Sonny's wasn't where he'd imagined himself 5 years after graduation, but life had a way of writing different stories than the ones people plan. The diner buzzed with its usual 7 a.m. energy as Ethan clocked in and reviewed the day's assignments. Section 2 was his 6 booths and 4 counter seats that would determine whether he could cover both his rent and his mother's mounting medical bills this month. The chemotherapy treatments weren't covered entirely by her insurance, and the $200 weekly gap fell to Ethan to bridge. Miller, Ray Patel's voice cut through the kitchen noise. The assistant manager emerged from the office, clipboard in hand, and his perpetual scowl already in place. Corporate's breathing down our necks about food costs again. No more free refills on coffee after the 3rd cup, and we're cutting portion sizes on the breakfast platters by 15%. Ethan nodded, though something twisted in his stomach. Sonny's had built its reputation on generous portions and unlimited coffee small gestures that made working-class customers feel valued rather than nickel and dimed. Also, Ray continued, I'm scheduling you for 4 shifts this week instead of 5. We're overstaffed and Victor wants labor costs down. The loss of that 5th shift meant $120 less in take-home pay money Ethan couldn't afford to lose. But arguing with Ray was pointless. The assistant manager seemed to take personal satisfaction in making staff members' lives more difficult. Vanessa Rodriguez, a fellow server, smirked from behind the coffee station. Guess you should have been more aggressive about picking up those weekend shifts, she said with false sympathy. Vanessa had a talent for positioning herself as Ray's favorite, often at other employees' expense. Ethan ignored her comment and began setting up his section. Despite the workplace politics and financial pressures, he found genuine satisfaction in the small moments, remembering that Mrs. Patterson liked her eggs over medium with extra pepper, or that teenage Marcus always ordered chocolate chip pancakes before his Saturday morning job at the hardware store. Good morning, Beverly, Ethan said to the hostess, an older woman whose warm smile had welcomed customers to Sonny's for nearly a decade. Morning, honey, Beverly replied, her voice carrying the kind of maternal warmth that made even difficult customers feel at home. We've got a full house today, so buckle up. As the morning rush intensified, Ethan moved efficiently between tables, taking orders, delivering food, and providing the kind of attentive service that had earned him consistently positive customer feedback. He genuinely cared about people's dining experience, even when management seemed focused solely on profit margins. Victor Chin, the diner's owner, rarely appeared on the floor. When he did visit, it was usually to discuss cost-cutting measures with Ray, or to complain about some expense that was eating into his margins. The man who had once taken pride in serving the community's best comfort food had gradually transformed into an absentee owner, more interested in spreadsheets than customer satisfaction. Around 10 a.m., as the breakfast rush began to slow, Ethan noticed a well-dressed man in his 50s enter the diner. Unlike most customers who came in groups or seemed familiar with the routine, this man moved with the careful observation of someone seeing the place for the first time. Beverly seated him in booth 7 within Ethan's section, and he approached with his usual professional warmth. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Sonny's. Can I start you with some coffee? The man looked up from the menu with intelligent eyes and a slight smile. Coffee would be perfect, thank you, and please call me Richard. As Ethan poured the coffee, Richard asked, How long have you been working here? About 2 years, Ethan replied. Are you visiting from out of town? Or is this your first time at Sonny's? First time, Richard said, his gaze taking in the diner's retro decor and bustling atmosphere. What would you recommend? What's the dish that really represents what this place is about? Ethan hesitated. The honest answer would have been the pot roast dinner. It had been Sonny's signature dish for 15 years. But recent cost-cutting measures had led to cheaper cuts of meat and smaller portions that no longer lived up to the diner's reputation. Well, Ethan said carefully, our burger and fries is always solid and the club sandwich is really popular. The breakfast items are excellent too if you're in the mood for that. Richard studied Ethan's face. What about the pot roast? I noticed it featured prominently on the menu. Ethan glanced around, then leaned slightly closer. Between you and me, I'd stick with the burger or the club sandwich today. Richard nodded appreciatively. I appreciate the honesty. The club sandwich it is with a side of fries. As Ethan walked away to place the order, he didn't notice Richard pulling out his phone to make a quick note. What seemed like casual conversation was actually careful evaluation by someone with the power to change everything at Sonny's Diner. Richard Taylor settled into booth 7 with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to observing businesses from the inside. His tailored suit and confident demeanor suggested success, but his questions about the diner revealed a deeper interest than typical customer curiosity. When Ethan delivered his club sandwich, Richard engaged him in conversation that went beyond the usual server-customer exchange. You mentioned you've been here 2 years, Richard said, taking a bite of the sandwich. What keeps you at Sonny's? This is excellent, by the way. Ethan refilled Richard's coffee cup. Honestly, the people, both the customers and most of the staff. There's something special about a place where people feel comfortable, where they can come for a good meal and friendly service without breaking the bank. And do you feel the current management supports that vision? The question was more direct than Ethan had expected. He glanced around the dining room, noting Ray's position near the kitchen and Vanessa's proximity to their conversation. Every business has its challenges, Ethan said diplomatically, but the core of what makes this place special, that's still here. Richard smiled at the carefully neutral response. You're diplomatic. That's a useful skill. Tell me, if you owned a place like this, what would you do differently? Ethan paused, surprised by the hypothetical question. I guess I'd focus more on the people, both the customers and the staff. When you take care of people, the profits usually follow. But when you focus only on profits, he shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Interesting perspective, Richard said, making another note on his phone. You sound like you've given this some thought. I have a business degree, Ethan admitted. Sometimes I can't help but think about how things could be run differently. Their conversation was interrupted by Ray's appearance at the table. Everything satisfactory here? He asked Richard with the forced smile he reserved for customers he perceived as potentially important. Excellent, Richard replied. Your server has been very attentive. Ray's smile became more genuine. Ethan's one of our dedicated employees. Sir, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you perhaps in the restaurant business yourself? You seem to have a professional interest in our operations. I'm in hospitality, Richard said vaguely, always interested in how different establishments approach customer service. After Ray moved away, Richard continued his conversation with Ethan. Your manager seems focused on making a good impression. Ray works hard, Ethan said again, choosing diplomacy over honesty. As Richard finished his meal, Beverly approached Ethan with a concerned expression. Honey, that gentleman in booth 7 has been asking me questions about the diner's history, employee turnover, that sort of thing. You might want to be careful what you say to him. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't particularly worried. His interactions with Richard had felt genuine, and the man's questions seemed to come from legitimate interest rather than any malicious intent. When Richard was ready to leave, he left a generous tip and made a point of thanking Ethan personally. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Richard said. You have a good perspective on business and people. That's a valuable combination. Thank you, sir. I hope you'll come back and see us again. Oh, I have a feeling I'll be seeing more of Sonny's very soon, Richard said with a knowing smile that Ethan didn't quite understand. As Richard left, Ray appeared at Ethan's side. What was that all about? What did he want to know? Just the usual customer conversation, Ethan replied. He seemed to enjoy the food. Ray looked suspicious but couldn't find fault with Ethan's explanation. We'll clock out early today. We're overstaffed for the afternoon shift. The early dismissal would cost Ethan another $30 in lost wages, but he complied without complaint. As he gathered his things, he couldn't shake the feeling that his conversation with Richard had been more significant than it appeared. What Ethan didn't know was that Richard Taylor was the executive vice president of operations for Sunrise Hospitality Group, the parent company that had recently acquired Sonny's Diner, along with 27 other locations. His visit was part of a comprehensive evaluation designed to assess the real culture and operations of their new acquisitions. Richard's notes from his conversation with Ethan were already being compiled into a report that would determine the future of everyone who worked at Sonny's. The young waiter's honesty, customer focus, and thoughtful approach to business had made a strong impression, one that would soon change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. The next evening brought an unexpected challenge that would test everything Ethan believed about doing what was right versus following company policy. The dinner rush was in full swing when Ray assigned him to cover sections 3 and 4, in addition to his usual section 2. Vanessa called in sick, Ray explained with obvious irritation. Says she's got food poisoning, but I bet she found something more lucrative for tonight. Ethan knew Ray was probably right. Vanessa had a talent for discovering private catering gigs or special events that paid better than her regular shifts, often calling in sick at the last minute when these opportunities arose. Managing 3 sections stretched Ethan thin, but he maintained his usual standard of service, moving efficiently between tables and ensuring every customer felt attended to. Around 7 p.m., as he was delivering orders to a family in Section 4, he noticed a commotion near the front entrance. A young woman with 2 small children, a boy who appeared to be about 6 and a girl maybe 4 years old, stood hesitantly in the doorway. Their clothes were clean but worn, and something in the woman's posture suggested exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. Beverly approached them with her usual warm smile. "Good evening, table for 3. Actually," the woman said quietly, "I was wondering, do you have any day-old bread or maybe some soup that—" She trailed off, clearly embarrassed. Ray, who had been watching from behind the counter, strode over quickly. "Ma'am, this is a restaurant, not a charity. If you can't pay for food, you need to leave." The woman's face flushed red. "I'm sorry, I just thought—" "No," Ray said firmly, his voice loud enough that nearby customers began to stare. "We don't give away food. That's not how businesses work." Ethan watched the scene unfold from across the dining room, his hands tightening around the plates he was carrying. The little girl was tugging on her mother's sleeve, and the boy was looking around the restaurant with the wide-eyed hunger that Ethan recognized from his own childhood during his father's unemployment. "Please," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My children haven't eaten since yesterday morning. I can work, I can wash dishes or clean tables. Ma'am, you need to leave now." Ray repeated, his tone growing harsher. "You're disturbing our paying customers." That's when Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He quickly delivered the plates to his table, then walked directly to the front of the restaurant. "Excuse me," he said to Ray, his voice calm but firm. "I'll take care of this." Ray's eyes narrowed. "Ethan, get back to your tables. This doesn't concern you." "Saksham, actually it does," Ethan replied, turning to the woman with a gentle smile. "Ma'am, I'm Ethan. Would you and your children like to join me for dinner? It would be my pleasure to treat you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I can't let you—" "Please," Ethan said softly. "I insist. Beverly, could you seat them in booth 12? It's nice and quiet back there." Ray grabbed Ethan's arm. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just—" "I'm buying dinner for some guests," Ethan said, gently removing Ray's hand from his arm. "Last I checked, that's not against any policy." "This is completely inappropriate," Ray hissed. "I'm writing you up for this." "That's your choice," Ethan replied, meeting Ray's glare steadily. "But right now, I have customers to serve." Beverly, who had been watching the exchange with growing admiration, stepped forward. "Right this way, honey," she said to the woman. "Booth 12 is perfect for families." As Ethan guided them to their table, he noticed that Richard Taylor was sitting in his usual booth 7, watching the entire scene with intense interest. Their eyes met briefly, and Richard gave an almost imperceptible nod of approval. "What are your names?" Ethan asked as he helped the children into their seats. "I'm Sarah," the woman said, still clearly overwhelmed by his kindness. "This is Tommy and this is Emma." "Well, Sarah, Tommy, and Emma, welcome to Sonny's. Let me get you some menus, and I think we might have some crayons for the kids." As he walked away to gather menus and crayons, Ethan felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. He'd done what felt right, but he knew Ray would make him pay for it. What he didn't realize was that his act of compassion was being carefully observed and documented by someone with the power to ensure that kindness would be rewarded rather than punished. The test had begun, and Ethan had just passed the most important part without even knowing he was being evaluated. Ethan returned to booth 12 with menus, crayons, and a genuine smile that immediately put the children at ease. Tommy and Emma's eyes lit up at the sight of the crayons, and they began coloring on the paper placemats while their mother studied the menu with careful attention. "Everything looks so good," Sarah said, her voice still shaky with emotion. "But really just something small would be." "Please," Ethan interrupted gently. "Order whatever sounds good to you and the kids. This is my treat, and I want you to enjoy it." Tommy looked up from his coloring. "Can we really get anything?" "Anything you want, buddy," Ethan confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. Emma, who had been quietly coloring a picture of what appeared to be a rainbow, whispered, "I like pancakes." "Well, you're in luck," Ethan said, crouching down to her level. "We make the best pancakes in town, and I happen to know that our cook Manny can make them in Mickey Mouse shapes if you'd like." The little girl's face broke into the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from any of them. Sarah ordered carefully Mickey Mouse pancakes for Emma, a grilled cheese sandwich for Tommy, and the soup and sandwich combo for herself. Ethan made mental notes to ensure the portions would be generous and to include extras that wouldn't appear on any bill. When he delivered their drinks, chocolate milk for the kids' coffee for Sarah, he also brought a small plate of crackers and a bowl of the day's fresh fruit. "This is just to tide you over while we prepare your food," he explained, though everyone at the table understood it was simply more kindness. As their meal was being prepared, Ethan checked on them, frequently refilling drinks and engaging the children in conversation about their drawings. He learned that Tommy was in first grade and loved dinosaurs, while Emma was starting kindergarten in the fall and wanted to be a teacher like Miss Johnson. When the food arrived, Ethan had worked with Manny to ensure every detail was perfect. Emma's Mickey Mouse pancakes came with extra whipped cream and a smiley face made of strawberries. Tommy's grilled cheese was accompanied by a generous portion of fries and a small cup of tomato soup for dipping. Sarah's sandwich was noticeably larger than the standard portion, and her soup bowl was filled to the brim. "This is too much," Sarah protested, though her children were already digging in with enthusiasm. "It's exactly right," Ethan assured her. "Enjoy every bite." As they ate, Ethan continued his regular duties, serving other tables, while keeping a watchful eye on booth 12. He noticed that Sarah was eating slowly, savoring each bite, while ensuring her children ate their fill first. During a brief lull, he approached their table again. "How is everything?" "It's wonderful," Sarah said, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. "I can't tell you what this means to us." "Can I ask?" Ethan said gently. "Are you folks just passing through town, or?" Sarah hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty was the least she owed this kind stranger. "We're staying at the shelter downtown. I lost my job 3 weeks ago, budget cuts at the office where I worked. I've been looking, but..." She shrugged helplessly. "What kind of work do you do?" "Administrative assistant mostly. Some bookkeeping. I'm good with computers and organization, but everywhere I've applied says they'll call." And then another shrug. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you never know what opportunities might come up. Sometimes things change when you least expect them." As the family finished their meal, Ethan discreetly prepared a bag with day-old bread rolls, some muffins, and a few pieces of fresh fruit items that would typically be discarded at the end of the shift. "Sarah," he said quietly as they prepared to leave, "I hope you don't mind, but we had some extra bread and pastries that would just go to waste. Would you mind taking them off our hands?" Sarah's composure finally broke, and tears streamed down her face. "You don't know what you've done for us tonight," she whispered. "You gave me the chance to do something that mattered," Ethan replied. "That's a gift too." As they left, Tommy turned back to wave goodbye, and Emma ran back to give Ethan a quick hug around his legs before rejoining her family. Ray, who had been watching from across the restaurant with growing irritation, approached Ethan as soon as the family was gone. "That was completely inappropriate," Ray said, his voice tight with anger. You violated company policy, undermined my authority, and set a precedent we can't afford to maintain. I bought dinner for some customers, Ethan replied calmly. I didn't violate any policy. You know exactly what you did, Ray snapped. And you know there will be consequences. What neither Ray nor Ethan noticed was that Richard Taylor had observed the entire interaction from his booth, taking careful notes on his phone. The test was complete, and the results were exactly what he had hoped to see. The next morning would bring revelations that would change everything at Sonny's Diner, starting with a staff meeting that no one saw coming. The next morning, Ethan arrived at work to find an unusual notice posted in the break room. Mandatory all-staff meeting, 9 a.m., no exceptions. In his 2 years at Sonny's, he'd never seen such a notice. Staff meetings were typically brief affairs held during slow periods, not formal gatherings that required everyone's presence. Beverly was already in the break room when Ethan clocked in her face, showing the same confusion he felt. Any idea what this is about? Ethan asked. Ray's been tight-lipped about it, Beverly replied. But he's been on the phone with someone from corporate since 7 a.m. Whatever it is, it's big. Other staff members filtered in as 9 a.m. approached Manny from the kitchen. Jeff, the other full-time server, Vanessa, who had miraculously recovered from her food poisoning, and several part-time employees. The atmosphere was tense with uncertainty. Ray stood at the front of the room, his usual confidence replaced by visible nervousness. Next to him stood Richard Taylor, the customer, who had become a regular over the past week. But Richard looked different, more authoritative, wearing a crisp business suit instead of his casual dining attire. Good morning, everyone. Ray began, his voice strained. I want to introduce Richard Taylor, who has some important information to share with all of you. Richard stepped forward, his demeanor professional but not unkind. Thank you, Ray. Good morning, everyone. I imagine you're wondering why I've called this meeting. He paused, making eye contact with each staff member before continuing. My name is Richard Taylor, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Operations for Sunrise Hospitality Group. For those who might not know, Sunrise Hospitality is the parent company that recently acquired Sonny's Diner, along with 27 other locations. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Ethan felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications of Richard's presence. For the past week, I've been conducting an undercover evaluation of this location, Richard continued. I've been observing operations, talking with staff, and assessing how well this restaurant aligns with our company's values and standards. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, while Jeff looked like he wanted to disappear. Beverly's expression remained neutral, but Ethan could see concern in her eyes. Last night, Richard said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I witnessed an incident that crystallized everything I've observed during my time here. He turned to look directly at Ray. I watched as a mother with 2 hungry children asked for help, and I saw how different members of this staff responded to that situation. Ray's face had gone pale. Sir, if this is about the policy regarding... This is about character, Richard interrupted firmly. It's about what kind of people we want representing our company and what kind of values we want to uphold. Richard then looked at Ethan. I also want everyone to meet Sarah Williams, my executive assistant. The break room door opened and Sarah entered, the same woman who had come in with 2 children the night before. But now she was dressed professionally, her demeanor confident and composed. Sarah, Richard explained, has been working with me on this evaluation. Last night's visit was a planned test to see how our staff would respond to a difficult situation, someone in genuine need asking for help. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Sarah hadn't really been in desperate need, but his response would have been the same regardless. What I observed, Richard continued, was one employee who publicly humiliated someone asking for help, showing no compassion or professional courtesy. And I observed another employee who immediately stepped forward to offer assistance, treating our customer with dignity and kindness. Ray's hands were visibly shaking now. Sir, I was following company policy about Ray Patel. Richard said formally, your employment with Sonny's Diner is terminated effective immediately. Your approach to customer service and staff management does not align with our company values. Ray opened his mouth to protest, but Richard continued without pause. Sarah, would you like to say something to the staff? Sarah stepped forward, her expression apologetic but professional. I want to apologize for the deception, but I also want to thank everyone who showed kindness last night. Ethan in particular, you treated my children and me with extraordinary compassion. Even though it was a test, your response was genuine, and it meant more than you know. She turned to address the entire group. The company has been evaluating not just this location, but several others. We're looking for people who embody the values we want to represent: integrity, compassion, and genuine care for both customers and colleagues. Richard took over again. Over the next 2 days, we'll be conducting individual reviews with each staff member. Some of you will be offered positions at other locations within our company. Others will be offered opportunities for advancement, and some, unfortunately, will be asked to seek employment elsewhere. He looked directly at Ethan. Ethan Miller, I'd like to speak with you first. Would you join me in the office? As Ethan followed Richard and Sarah to the small office behind the kitchen, he could hear the excited murmur of conversation breaking out behind them. His mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. The test was over, and somehow, without even knowing he was being evaluated, Ethan had passed. But what came next would exceed his wildest expectations and change not just his career, but his entire understanding of what was possible when compassion and business success worked together. In the cramped office behind Sonny's kitchen, Ethan sat across from Richard Taylor and Sarah Williams, still processing the dramatic turn his morning had taken. The space felt different now, less like a place where he'd receive schedule changes and reprimands, and more like the setting for a conversation that would reshape his future. Ethan, Richard began, I want to be completely transparent with you about what we've observed during this evaluation. Sarah opened a tablet and pulled up what appeared to be detailed notes. Over the past week, we've documented not just your interactions with customers, but your relationships with coworkers, your work ethic, and your approach to problem solving. Beverly and Manny have been filing quarterly reports with corporate for over a year, Richard explained. They've been documenting concerns about management practices and highlighting staff members who maintain high standards despite challenging circumstances. Your name appears in every single one of their reports. Ethan was surprised. I had no idea they were doing that. They care about this place and the people who work here, Sarah said. Their reports were part of what prompted our evaluation. They specifically mentioned your customer service skills, your reliability, and your integrity. Richard leaned forward. But what we observed last night went beyond professional competence. Your response to Sarah and her children showed the kind of character and judgment we're looking for in leadership positions. Leadership positions? Ethan repeated, uncertain he'd heard correctly. We'd like to offer you the position of assistant manager here at Sonny's, Richard said, with the understanding that after appropriate training and a 6-month evaluation period, you'd be promoted to general manager. Sarah slid a folder across the desk. This is a formal offer letter. The salary is double what you're currently making with full benefits starting immediately, including health insurance that would cover your mother's medical expenses. Ethan stared at the documents, the numbers seeming surreal. I don't understand. I don't have management experience. I'm still working on finishing my business degree. Experience can be taught, Richard said. Character can't. We have training programs, mentorship opportunities, and support systems to help you develop the technical skills you'll need. What we can't teach is the instinct to do the right thing when no one's watching or when you think no one's watching. There's something else, Sarah added. We've established what we call a Good Neighbor Fund at each location. It's specifically designed for situations like the one you encountered last night, helping community members who need assistance. What you did out of your own pocket, you'll now be able to do as part of your job. Ethan looked up from the offer letter. What about the other staff, Beverly, Manny, the people who've been doing good work? Beverly will be promoted to head hostess with a significant raise, Richard replied. Manny is being offered the head cook position with better compensation and benefits. We're investing in the people who've maintained standards and shown loyalty to this place. Owaki and the others. Richard's expression grew more serious. Jeff, Vanessa, and 2 other employees who failed our character evaluation will be offered severance packages and assistance finding positions elsewhere. We're not interested in maintaining a culture that tolerates indifference or selfishness. Ethan studied the offer letter, his mind racing through the implications. The salary increase would solve his immediate financial problems and allow him to focus on his mother's care without constant worry. The management experience would advance his career beyond anything he'd imagined possible. But something made him hesitate. "Can I ask about the company's values?" he said. "I mean specifically what would be expected of me as a manager." Richard smiled, clearly pleased by the question. "What do you think should be expected?" Ethan took a breath, deciding to be completely honest. "If I accept this position, I need to know that we're not going to cut corners on food quality to save money. I need to know that staff will be treated fairly and with respect. And I need to know that we'll continue to be the kind of place where people feel welcome, even if they're not our most profitable customers." "Those are exactly the values we want to uphold," Sarah said. "That's why we're offering you this position." "The restaurant business is challenging," Richard added, "but we've learned that treating employees well and serving the community creates customer loyalty that's more valuable than short-term cost savings. Places like Sunny's succeed when they're integral parts of their communities." Ethan looked at the offer letter again, then back at Richard and Sarah. "I accept, but with one condition." "What's that?" "I want to implement a community table program one night a week where people who need a meal can come in and eat with dignity, no questions asked. Not charity, but community." Richard and Sarah exchanged glances. Then Richard extended his hand. "Welcome to management, Ethan. I think you're going to do extraordinary things here." As they shook hands, Ethan realized that his act of kindness the night before hadn't just helped a family in need. It had revealed possibilities he'd never imagined, and opened doors to a future where doing good and doing well weren't opposing forces, but complementary aspects of meaningful work. The transformation of Sonny's Diner was about to begin, and Ethan would be leading it. 6 months after the dramatic staff meeting that changed everything, Sonny's Diner had become something remarkable, a testament to what was possible when authentic leadership met genuine community values. Ethan stood behind the counter at 6 a.m., reviewing the day's prep list with Manny, who had embraced his new role as head cook with enthusiasm and pride. "The pot roast is back to the original recipe," Manny reported with satisfaction. "Prime cuts slow-cooked for 8 hours, just like we used to do before." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the before and after timeline that divided Sonny's history. Beverly, now head hostess, greeted the early morning regulars with the warmth that had always been her trademark, but now with the confidence that came from working in an environment that valued her contributions. Mrs. Patterson was already at her usual table enjoying eggs over medium with extra pepper, just the way she liked them. The most visible change was the community table program Ethan had implemented. Every Wednesday evening, Sonny's opened its doors to anyone who needed a meal regardless of their ability to pay. What had started as Ethan's condition for accepting the management position had evolved into the restaurant's most celebrated feature. "We're not serving charity," Ethan would explain to visitors who came to observe the program. "We're building community. Everyone who sits at that table, whether they're paying customers, community volunteers, or people who need assistance, is part of our extended family." The program had attracted attention from local media, other restaurants, and community organizations. But more importantly, it had created a culture where kindness was expected rather than exceptional. Regular customers had embraced the Wednesday tradition, often timing their own visits to coincide with community table nights. Some volunteered to help serve, others contributed to the Good Neighbor Fund, and many simply enjoyed being part of something larger than a typical dining experience. "It's changed the whole feeling of this place," observed Marcus, the teenager, who still ordered chocolate chip pancakes before his Saturday job. "It feels like somewhere you matter, you know." The financial results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Online reviews consistently praised both the food quality and the atmosphere, and revenue had increased by 40% over the previous year. The community table program, rather than being a drain on profits, had become a marketing asset that attracted new customers and built fierce loyalty among existing ones. Staff turnover had dropped to nearly zero. The team that remained after the evaluation had bonded around shared values, and new hires were carefully selected for character as much as competence. The employee meal program had been reinstated, breakroom conditions had been improved, and staff members felt genuinely valued rather than merely tolerated. On this particular morning, as Ethan was reviewing inventory reports, Beverly approached with a knowing smile. "We have some special visitors today," she announced. "Richard Taylor and Victor Chin are here." Ethan looked up to see Richard entering with an older Asian man he recognized from company photos. Victor Chin, the founder and CEO of Sunrise Hospitality Group. Both men were smiling as they surveyed the bustling restaurant. "Ethan," Richard called out, "I'd like you to meet Victor Chin." Victor extended his hand with genuine warmth. "I've heard remarkable things about what you've accomplished here. Richard tells me this location has become our flagship for community engagement." "It's been a team effort," Ethan replied. "We've had incredible support from corporate, and the staff here is exceptional." "Don't be modest," Victor said. "The numbers speak for themselves, but more importantly, the culture you've created here is exactly what we envisioned when we acquired these locations." Surely, Richard pulled out his tablet showing data that made Ethan's eyes widen. Customer retention is up 65%, average ticket size has increased 30%, and we've had zero health code violations since the restructuring. But the most impressive statistic is employee satisfaction. You're scoring 94% on internal surveys. "There's something else," Victor added, his expression growing more serious. "We'd like to discuss expanding your role within the company." "Sanam." The three men moved to a quiet booth, the same booth 7, where Richard had first observed Ethan's character during that initial undercover evaluation. "We're implementing the community table program across all 28 Sunny's locations," Victor explained, "but we need someone to oversee that rollout, someone who understands that business success and human compassion aren't opposing forces, but complementary ones." Richard leaned forward. "We're offering you the position of Director of Community Engagement at our corporate headquarters. You'd be responsible for training managers at other locations, developing community partnership programs, and ensuring that the values you've established here become standard across our entire operation." Ethan felt the familiar mixture of excitement and uncertainty that had accompanied every major opportunity in his journey. "What about Sunny's this location?" "We'd promote Beverly to general manager," Victor said. "She's been here longer than anyone understands the culture you've built and has shown exceptional leadership during the transition. Manny would become assistant manager, giving him the advancement opportunity he's earned. And we'd bring in someone who shares your values to fill the head cook position," Richard added. "The community table program would continue, and this location would serve as a training site for other managers." Ethan looked around the restaurant at Beverly greeting customers with genuine warmth, at Manny efficiently coordinating the kitchen, at the frame photo near the register showing the staff at their first community table event. This place had become more than a job. It had become proof that his ideals about business and community could work in practice. The position would come with a significant salary increase. Victor continued, "And you'd have the resources to expand community engagement beyond just the restaurant business. We're looking at partnerships with local schools, food banks, job training programs, initiatives that make our restaurants integral parts of their communities." "There's one more thing," Richard said with a smile. "Sarah Williams, who you met during our evaluation, would be your deputy director. She's been instrumental in developing the training materials for the community table program." Ethan thought about his mother, whose medical bills were now fully covered by his current benefits package. He thought about the business degree he'd finally been able to complete with the company's educational assistance program. Most importantly, he thought about the dozens of people who had been served at the community table and the hundreds more who could benefit if the program expanded. "I accept," Ethan said, "but I want to stay involved with this location. I'd like to visit regularly, help with training, and make sure we never lose sight of what we built here." Victor extended his hand. "Welcome to the corporate team, Ethan. I have a feeling you're going to help us transform not just our restaurants, but our entire approach to business." As they shook hands, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple act of kindness, buying dinner for a family in need, had revealed character that corporate leaders recognized and valued. But more than that, it had proven that doing the right thing, even when it seemed risky or costly, could lead to opportunities beyond anything he'd imagined. The transformation of Sunny's Diner was complete, but Ethan's larger mission was just beginning. Across 28 locations, thousands of employees and customers would benefit from the values he'd helped establish: that every person deserved dignity, that businesses could serve their communities while generating profits, and that character mattered more than credentials in creating authentic success. As he prepared to transition to his new role, Ethan knew that the real measure of his success wouldn't be found in corporate reports or profit margins, but in the number of people who felt valued, fed, and welcomed in the communities his work would serve. The waiter who had risked his job to help a hungry family had become a leader whose influence would extend far beyond any single restaurant, proving that sometimes the most important business decisions are the ones made with the heart rather than the spreadsheet. Disclaimer. This content is entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. The story, all names, characters, and incidents portrayed in this production are fictitious. No identification with actual persons living or deceased places, buildings, and products is intended or should be inferred. No person or entity associated with this content has received any payment or anything of value or entered into any agreement in connection with the depiction of tobacco products. This video is not intended to defame, insult, or convey false information about any individual.